and starting the stream.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Ryan. I'm a senior meteorologist here with the National Weather Service in Indianapolis. And we wanted to throw out our thoughts here for Central Indiana for the winter weather outlook for this coming winter, 2023-24. It certainly doesn't feel like winter on this day that we're recording it, Tuesday, November the 14th. The weather's beautiful here in Central Indiana, but there are a lot of things to think about going forward as we move into the winter. And unfortunately, last year, the winter was a lot like what we saw in this picture here with no snow on the ground. And this is from our warning coordination meteorologist, Sam Lashley, up in Montgomery County. He took this picture in early January. And unfortunately, we just didn't see a lot of snow on the ground at all during the year and during the season. And in fact, here in Indianapolis, we only had 10 inches of snowfall for the entire year, which was 15 inches below what we typically see in an entire winter season. So over these next few slides, I'm going to show you what we're thinking for the upcoming winter. Certainly, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in and we'll answer them. We may have some time for questions at the end. And, you know, if you get a chance to watch us this morning, let us know where you're watching us from, because we always love to see where everybody's checking us out from. So let's start out with the winter outlook that came out from the Climate Prediction Center about a month ago. They typically put out their winter outlook in mid to late October. And El Niño, as I'm sure many have probably heard this year, is the driving force on how we expect the winter to play out. Now, it's not going to be the only feature, but it's going to be a dominant feature. And typically when we see stronger El Niños, which is what we're expecting this year, and I'll explain what that means here in a minute, we tend to see warmer than normal conditions, or a greater chance for warmer than normal conditions across the northern part of the country, while the southern part of the country tends to be near normal or even a little cooler than normal because it's more active with precipitation down there. And so you can see in all the areas listed in orange here, or showing in orange, these are areas that have been identified across the northern part of the country where we are expecting a greater chance for warmer than normal conditions. Now, when we flip over to the precipitation side of things, the strongest signal that we tend to see in a winter with El Niño conditions, and particularly a stronger El Niño, is here locally in the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley. We tend to see drier than normal conditions, and that shows up here as well in the brown colors, where there is a much greater chance for below normal precipitation throughout the winter, while it looks much wetter, at least the chances for much wetter conditions across the southern part of the country, and particularly across the southeast states and down into Florida. And again, this is something very common during a winter with El Niño conditions. So what exactly does El Niño mean? And I'm just going to put this graphic up again with both the temperature and precipitation together, just so everybody can see that for a minute, and then let's go forward to talking about what El Niño means. And when we're discussing El Niño, we're talking about something that's happening thousands of miles away in the equatorial Pacific. But what's happening out there has an impact on the weather that we see downstream across North America. And with El Niño, or the positive phase as we mentioned, or call it, basically what we see is water temperatures in the equatorial Pacific Ocean tend to be warmer than normal. And the strength of the El Niño depends on how much warmer than normal those water temperatures are. And this year, for instance, our water temperatures are well above normal in the equatorial Pacific, and that's leading to this being a stronger El Niño, of which we've only had 6 or 7 of those winters over the last 70 years. So what does that do downstream for the weather in the North America, and specifically across the Ohio Valley and central Indiana? Well, we have 2 jet streams that kind of modulate our weather in the upper levels of the atmosphere. Throughout the winter in particular, we have a polar jet stream, which tends to bring the colder air down from Canada, and we have what's called a subtropical jet stream that sometimes will bring that deep moisture that we see out of the Pacific, out of the Gulf of Mexico, to help bring some of those heavier precipitation events in the winter, whether that be snow, freezing rain, a mixture, or even just rain. Now, when those 2 jets align, or what we call phase together, that's when we tend to see here locally in central Indiana and the Ohio Valley some of these big storms that can produce the really heavy snows when we have enough cold air, that can produce the ice storms that can cripple us sometimes, and that can produce the very heavy rainfall that we sometimes see that can create flooding. During years with El Nino, those jet streams tend to stay separate more frequently, and the map here shows that. The polar jet is in the purple, the subtropical jet is in the red. The subtropical jet tends to stay frequently more across the southern tier of the country and then curls up along the east coast, while the polar jet stays up over Canada. And that causes two things. That causes a lot of the colder air to stay to the north and allows us to be milder as more of our airflow comes from the Pacific. And because the subtropical jet is south, that keeps a lot of the heavier precipitation to the south of us as well. So we don't see those as much precipitation, we don't really see as much cold air, and that's why we tend to see drier and warmer conditions during El Nino winters. So what are our winter season normals? Now I'm just showing you December through February because that's what we consider meteorological winter. But as I think many of you know here, we can see snow in November, which we did last year, and we can certainly see snow in March and April, which has happened in recent years. But as you see here in Indianapolis, we average a temperature right around 31, 32 degrees for the entire winter, with our coldest temperatures in January. Precipitation is around 2.5 to 3 inches each month, about 8.5 inches for the entire winter season. And then snowfall itself, we average about 21 inches in these 3 months. And when you add in October, November, March, and April, our average is about 25.5 inches for the entire season. Now, in strong El Nino years, this is how things change. And again, this is going and looking back at 6 winters with similar conditions to what we're seeing this year over the last 70 years. And that historical context is critical in helping us to put together our forecast along with what the model data and some of the atmospheric data shows us going forward into the winter. And you can see that we tend to be quite a bit warmer throughout the winter, and we also tend to be drier, and particularly that dryness increases as we go through the winter in January and February. But I'll draw your attention over to the far right with snowfall, and you can see that our snowfall is well down from what we tend to see in the December to February period. Almost a third of what normally is expected from December to February. And that's why we feel pretty confident about lower snowfall totals this year. So I'm just going to show a couple of maps before we finish things up, just to kind of highlight that from a pictorial side. This just shows what temperature anomalies or differences tend to be during stronger El Nino winters. On the left-hand side is maximum temperatures, the right-hand side is minimum temperatures, and you can see across much of the northern half of the country, including here in central Indiana, we tend to see temperatures that average 2 to 3 degrees above normal throughout the winter, both with highs and low temperatures, and that's why we're more confident in warmer than normal conditions this winter. When we switch it over to precipitation, this is looking at all El Nino years, not just strong El Ninos, but you can see pretty clearly in the yellow, those are areas that receive less precipitation than normal during these El Nino winters. And it shows up very well here in Indiana and the Ohio Valley. When we take it to snowfall, that shows up the same as well. Less snowfall than anticipated, than normal, in these yellow colors. And in fact, where we tend to see greater snowfall than what's accustomed to normal is down across the southern tier of the country. You can see the blues there in the Texas Panhandle and New Mexico, and then again over the southern Appalachians, North Carolina, and things like that. And again, that's because that southern storm track is more active, and whenever cold air occasionally gets pulled down, where the cold and the moisture interact in such a way, we see it in those areas as opposed to here in the Ohio Valley, and that's why they tend to do better in snowfall in those years. When we take it to more stronger El Ninos, you can see during the winter that those signals strengthen. We actually are even drier, more drier than normal here across the Ohio Valley. You can see that with kind of the orange color right here, while the blues are more intense across the Texas Panhandle, the Appalachians, the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. And again, that's where that colder air can sometimes interact with the deeper moisture, with the precipitation tracking further to the south of us. And just one final map before we finish up with a summary. These are 3 winters with recent stronger El Niños that were recorded. In the upper left, we have the 1982-83 winter. In the upper right, we have the 91-92 winter. And at the lower level, we have 1997-98. All years that exhibited strong El Niño events. And you can see very clearly where we have those oranges and those brownish colors, that's where precipitation was below normal. And that shows up very well again here across the Ohio Valley and particularly central Indiana in all three of those events. So based on all of that, here are our thoughts here for central Indiana. Our highest confidence is in drier than normal conditions, especially as the winter progresses. We may actually see a little uptick in precipitation chances in December, but then we should trend back to drier than normal conditions for January and February, and that may even bleed into March. Temperatures are likely to average warmer than normal for the winter with periodic shots of colder air. You're not going to get rid of all of the colder air throughout the winter, but we don't see extended periods of very cold conditions likely to occur. It's probably going to be, it gets cold for a few days and then we warm back up. In general, we think that'll average out to a pretty mild winter. Those polar and subtropical jets I talked about will remain separated with greater frequency, and that further supports the potential for drier than normal conditions and a greater threat for less snowfall. And finally, I'll just mention, if the ridge, which positions itself in the upper levels across the southeast United States, flexes at all, that could pull the subtropical jet north into the region, which might give us some increased impact from storm systems. I'm not saying that can't happen, it's just trends show that that is not likely to happen with a normal frequency. It'll be a less of a frequency because of the way the atmosphere is set up during the stronger El Niños. With that, I'll leave this up and we can certainly take any questions that you might have.
So Mike, we had one question about the forecast about today, or actually they asked about the forecast, and I'm not sure whether they were talking about today or whether they were talking about the winter. Obviously, you just gave them the whole forecast for the winter, what the outlook is. But one thing that I suggested that they look at is actually today's weather pattern is very similar to the classic El Nino slide that you had a few slides back. If you want to jump back to that, I can kind of add on to what you were talking about.
Sure.
So when we look at the El Nino pattern, like Mike mentioned here, there's the strong warm area across the western parts of the North American continent. And that's due to strong ridging over there. And as that brings in warm Pacific air that essentially flows down into the Great Plains and then into the Ohio Valley. Well, if you look at today's satellite picture, you're seeing this in effect right now. It's subsidence, it's warm air arriving. We have cold air off to the north up near Hudson's Bay in a quick northwest flow. And then if you look down across the Gulf states, you're going to see clouds and you'll see that subtropical jet, just like you see in that picture. That's the area where chances for rain are greater. So today is a really great example of the impacts of El Nino weather going on.
Absolutely, that's a great point, Jason. And just to add, we're talking about winter, but be remiss if I didn't mention we're really getting spoiled, if you will, right now with a lot of very pleasant weather here for mid-November, and it's because we don't have any phasing of these jets, as Jason was mentioning, going on, and so the weather is very benign. We have high pressure, a lot of sunshine. Typically, as we move into November, we move into the cloudier phase of our year. It's a lot more clouds are more frequent. We increase the cloudy days, if you will, and we haven't really seen any of that. We've had a lot of bright sunny days. We've had temperatures that have been near to above normal in the 50s and 60s. It's been a very, very pleasant stretch of weather, which is going to continue for the next few days before we transition to a colder pattern during the week of Thanksgiving, and that's likely to continue through the end of the month. But then there are signs looking out that we may transition back to warmer than normal conditions for December. Now, once we get to late November and early December, our average highs are in the 40s. So you can be in the 50s, and that's above normal temperatures. So put it in perspective there a little bit, but we aren't seeing any extended periods of winter on the horizon. And so certainly, enjoy the weather the next few days, as we're going to have very pleasant conditions, sunny skies, highs in the 50s and 60s, really throughout much of the rest of this week.
Mike, we have no other questions, so why don't you go ahead and wrap it up?
All right, sounds good. I thank everybody. We appreciate everyone watching this. We'll certainly probably send out more videos as we go throughout the winter. But enjoy the weather, and we'll talk to you again soon.